This is January 30th, 2023, Parshat Beshalah, the Parsha of the splitting of the Red Sea, in which we are going to discuss some issues relating to how we read and how we understand the Bible and how we understand these very, very complicated texts. And we have had a discussion prior to this recording as we start about last week. And the question is to how we are looking at this and understanding this. And using that question, I'm going to go into this week's Parsha. With its centerpiece, the splitting of the Red Sea, and then following that, the Song of the Sea, arguably the greatest miracle in the whole Torah, perhaps the greatest miracle of the whole Bible, which only suggests to us, how do you even understand this? How do you approach this kind of text? And what are you supposed to take from it? Okay, so I'm gonna put up for the next few minutes the scene from the Ten Commandments, which is, of course, our favorite punching bag when it comes to discussing the Bible, because I think that it tries to do something and has an effect on us. I think to this day, even though the film was made in the 50s, it certainly was a monumental achievement in its time. I'm just going to find the right page here. I'm sorry, I'm going to get it up. I always have this problem. Here we go. Let's see. Here we go. So enjoy this for a few minutes.
Your flocks, we must go with all speed. Go away! Drown in the sea.
It's going to come on in a second. He's going to start moving.
After this day, you shall see his chariots no more. No! You'll be dead under them. No! The Lord of hosts will do battle for us. Behold his mighty hand. The blast of his nostrils. Keep them through the midst of the water. His will be done.
He opens the waters before them. He bars our way with fire. Let us go from this place. Men cannot fight against a God.
Better to die in battle with a God than live in shame.
That must be Joseph's bones.
Mm.
Moses, stand on the rock where the people can see you and have hope. Above us, help our wagon. Fire dies. On the pursuit. This is work for a butcher, not a pharaoh. Destroy them all. Bring Moses to me alive. Rebels, there! Forward! Chariot! Ah! Run! Run! Run behind! Better to serve the Egyptians than to die here. Who shall withstand the power of God? Thou didst blow with thy winds, and the sea covered them. Who is like unto thee, O Lord? From everlasting to everlasting, thou art God.
Okay, wow. So you watch that and you have to go like, that was incredible movie making, in the mid-50s. And so much I read just in preparing here, took about 6 months to prepare that scene visually, and the way that they did the effects. There's the splitting of the sea happens because two big, huge tanks of water are poured in, but they're using the film in reverse. Okay, the water, they film the water coming in, but they play it in reverse, and in the film it comes out. Oh, that makes sense, right? Because you can't do that, so they figured a way to do that. And the walls of water are held up. There's some kind of gelatinous thing that went in there, etc. But what it made me think of, this is filmed in the mid-50s. Let me get your reactions in terms of just what it's doing at its time, in terms of trying to represent this great moment. What do you think what are I'll use the fancy word, what are the tropes here that they are using, and why are they using that? What's in and this is Cecil B. DeMille directing it, and I'm sure he's got a team of hundreds of people, producing it with their visual effects at that time, animation, etc., and other kinds of ways of making the movie. But what are the tropes there in terms of looking at the people, looking at the way that the people are depicted, and what comes first to mind when you think of that? Anybody? Go ahead, Nanette. You have to unmute, and then Stanley, go ahead.
So honestly, what comes to my mind first, of course, like everyone else, I grew up with this, been watching this my whole life. Yeah. But what comes to my mind first is time. I mean, honestly, if I'm walking, if I'm running, and I got chariots behind me, how is it that the chariots, don't catch up to the people?
All right, good technical question. That they're far behind. They're far behind, and of course there's a pillar of fire preceding them. The pillar of fire is guarding the people of Israel at the bottom. Okay. But what kind of reaction do you have to what's depicted there? Stanley, you had your hand up there before.
Yeah. So in terms of your question, for me, the main trope is the power of God.
Okay.
And this follows very much from last week's Parasha also, where God several times says, I'm God and I'm in charge here. And in the Haftorah as well last week, it's repeated several times.
Yeah. I'm
God and I'm going to destroy your enemies. I'm in charge. And that's very much what strikes me here. If God wants to part the sea, God is going to part the sea and save the Israelites and destroy the Egyptians. So it's a very, very dramatic way of asserting the preeminence and power of God.
Okay, good. Helene, and then Alana. Go ahead.
My imagination certainly isn't that good. It really brought it to life for me. It may not be so factual to the time, and I've read other things about, the Reed Sea, not the Red Sea, and it wasn't that deep, and they, the winds, but Cecil B. DeMille, I thought, did it for me.
He did it for you. Okay, Ilana, go ahead.
For many years, the students of mine in 5th grade always used to say, why did the horses have to go through such a bad experience? Did they come alive? Did they not? So why were the horses?
Why the horses get destroyed, right? The horses function as the armor.
It's not a good example to God deeds. In a way.
God laments the at least the way the rabbis depicted. God laments the destruction of creation in the pursuit of the higher means. It's a very, it's the tangled moral problem, back to what we started with, which is, in war, the innocent often die with the guilty. Bob.
Two things came out for me. The first was chaos and order
Okay.
in terms of the water smashing everyone around, and then the question of the order and the ordering of people. And the second one was Pharaoh's comment, this is only work for the butcher, not for me.
Yeah.
And yet, if one is defeating the Yetzer Hara, which for me is part of what Pharaoh's about, he is in fact brought down.
It's all fascinating. Okay, yes, all that, the chaos, etc., and of course the allegory, the allegorical reading. My question really was more of, in looking at the way that the people are depicted, and noting that this is a timestamp of the mid-50s, and the images of refugees are still very fresh in the mind of the this is an audience that is still kind of traumatized by the Second World War, by newsreels. What are you watching prior to the main feature? Are you still watching newsreels in 1953? Maybe, maybe not. But the images and the photographs of these refugees and their stories that they may not be talking about it as much as they are 20 years later, but these scenes are part of the landscape here. Not only that, but the music, if you listen carefully to the music balances the victims and the aggressors, and the martial music of the pursuing Egyptians, and the more pastoral. And I will say I heard a couple of Jewish chords in there. Okay, and it would be worth a deeper dive to see who wrote this music, because you have a couple of, there was maybe one or two chords that were in the minor key of Hatikva or something like that, and you couldn't escape feeling that there's a Jewish drama here. And so as critical as I am of the movie for lots of reasons, and we'll get to that in a second, what it does effectively here is it focuses on, and here I'll differ slightly with you, Stanley. The focus is not particularly on Moses, who's a caricature. I think Charlton Heston, that performance, whatever. But the people are really the main character here, and and I got a kick out of watching the animals and the ducks and the sheep and the flocks and everything. And of course, this is their way of trying to answer the question as to what do you live off of, and how does the rest of the Bible make sense, given that there's so much sacrifice going on later on, and they have to eat, and how they are able to leave with all of these wagon loads of possessions, as opposed to being destitute. So my point is that it's an attempt to interpret the text, and it's a valiant attempt, but as all visual depictions attempt to interpret this, they leave the room for so many more questions in the way that I guess the text is supposed to. Nanette, you have your hand up there, and I want to just show another example. Go ahead.
Yeah, very quickly. So I can't help wondering if this was made in the 50s, which it was. Yes. And I'm going to speculate that a lot of Jews in America, they weren't studying. I mean, Chabad wasn't doing his thing. So I can't help wondering, what were they thinking? Because if a lot of Jews in America wanted to assimilate, maybe this film was upsetting to them, because in the 50s, right after World War II, after the Holocaust, maybe they wanted to forget. And here this thing is like bringing forth the whole Jewish thing.
I would love to, as I said, it's the film itself is a phenomenon, and why it's being made, and who Cecil B. DeMille is, and what's going on with people. And I think these are really, really important questions. Look, it's now 80 years since that film, or 70 years since the film was made. And what was the impact of the film? How it was received? Did it threaten people in the sense, and what sense did it have for a religious audience? Was there a religious audience that went there? What did it do to the mainstream audience? What did it do to Christian America? And let's be honest, most of America, 97%, 98% of America is Christian. So what did this do in terms of shaping their imagination, etc.? I think these are great questions, and I don't have the academic tools to really answer those. I'd love to research that, but I think they're valid. Helene, I didn't read your comment. What did you say?
I'm not
57.
muted. Sorry, 1957, not 1953. It won the award for best visual effects amongst and 6 others.
Okay, here's another attempt. This is from Gods and Kings. The Red Sea. Wait a minute, maybe this might be afterwards. I'm just going to move it forward a little bit. Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. This is the. No. Right. 1 second. Sorry. This is a different one. This is Ridley Scott. I don't know this movie at all. 2014. Another depiction of it. I'm just gonna. This is how this is computer generated graphics. Look at this. Those are the Israelites. This is Moses with the sword. So this is nonsense. Okay. This is nonsense. This is Pharaoh, the Egyptians, and computer generated effects. The dry lands. Egyptians coming. Music in the background. No, nothing near anything the way. These are struggling Israelites trying to get up to dry land. The tornadoes, the sea. The lone horseman. Oh, terrible. Tornadoes. A little Ben-Hur action there. So he tells his army to turn back. Okay, this is total mayhem. Moses resolute. No, nowhere in the text. This is, I want to stop it because it's just nonsense. Okay, this is all made up. Okay, the murderous Pharaoh wants to kill Moses. Okay, and now it's just boom. Yeah. Good.
Rabbi, what was the source of this again, please?
This is Ridley Scott. Yeah, Moses and whatever. I don't even know the movie. 2014 of God and Man and Exodus.
Thank you.
So this is interesting. The chariots, the dead Egyptians. Okay, and you'll see. Oh, it doesn't show us that Moses came up. All right. So I'm sorry. What I wanted to show with that is that there is you could go all over the place with this. You know, and if I'm to ask the question, you know, what do you think it was within the director's imagination that did this? I would offer just a couple of things here, and one of the things that I would offer is this is after the tsunami in Japan, and this is after the the filming of Titanic. So you know, both of those are events which kind of sear in the visual imagination. You know what it would be like to be drowned. I'm sure there must have been, you know, there may be, you know, a dozen other movies that depict these kinds of things. The point is that this, I mean, you know, I don't know where he's going with this, and this film was you know. Half of you, not maybe 90% of you, don't even know that this film even exists, and that itself says something. So my point in showing this is that the text itself makes a different set of demands on us, probably along the lines of our conversation prior to this, which is their demands of how you read and how you understand. Okay. So I'm just going to read you the text now, and we could stop at different places and ask questions that the text wants us to ask, and then from there get an idea that while this moment is the emblematic moment of the story of the Exodus, clearly, the question as to how the Torah wants us to think of it and how this event lodges in our imagination, in our religious imagination, and in our cultural imagination, I think goes beyond the movies. In the end, and here I'm going to say this, you know, as someone devoted to the Bible, in the end we have the text. That's the starting point, and that's the end point. We can make hundreds of different movies about it, but in the end, the text is going to yield for us its mysteries, or reveal to us itself, or disclose questions to us that we can't answer, but it's going to open for us ways of trying to understand the ideas. And what are the ideas here? Let me read, try and read as much as we can. God spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to the children of Israel that they may turn back and encamp before Piachirot, between Migdol and the sea, before Baal Zephonah opposite it. You are to encamp by the sea. So this is complicated, and we did a little bit of it this last year. There's a complicated geography here. In other words, go back, you know, you're going to go from one place to another place in a kind of zigzag. Now Pharaoh will say to the children of Israel, they are confused in the land. The wilderness is closed to them. So your pattern of marching or travel is going to set Pharaoh into thinking that maybe he has a chance. So God is creating a kind of trap for Pharaoh, okay, along the lines of what we're saying, that God is not particularly too, compassionate here. And not only that, but God will make Pharaoh's heart strong-willed so that he pursues them. He's not going to work on his own instinct. He's going to work opposite to instinct. And God is going to make him pursue them, that I will be glorified through Pharaoh and all his army, so that the Egyptians may know that I am God. They did thus. So in other words, what the bottom line is, it's to get Pharaoh to have this understanding that God is God. The king of Egypt was told that the people fled. Pharaoh's heart, that of his servants. Interesting that the servants changed here regarding the people. He said, what now have we done that we have sent free Israel from serving us? They make a political decision. He had his chariot harnessed while his fighting people took with him. And he took 600 selected chariots of every kind of chariot of Egypt, teams of 3 upon them. And God made the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, strong-willed, so that he pursued the children of Israel while the children of Israel were going out to the high hand. The Egyptians pursued them and overtook them, encamped by the sea, all of Pharaoh's chariot horses, his riders, and his army by Pi-Hahirot before Baal-Zephon. Pharaoh drew near, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes. Now here, Egypt marching after them. They were exceedingly afraid. And the children of Israel cried out to God. And they said to Moshe, I'm just going to silence everyone because there's no. They said to Moshe, is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us out to die in the wilderness? What now have you done to us, bringing us out of Egypt? I think this is also one of the great moments in the whole story, that the film, Ten Commandments film, picked up on it. The second film didn't pick up at all, which is that this creates a moment of doubt for the people, and it's I would say, without being too sarcastic, this is the birth of Jewish humor. What, you took us out of Egypt to die in the desert? What's going on here? It's irony, it's bitter, there's a bit of a laugh here, okay? Because who could say that? And what does it mean in terms of the chutzpah to turn against Moses and not to see the big picture and to only see that this is, what's in front of you? Is this not the very word that we spoke to you in Egypt, saying, let us alone, that we may serve Egypt? Indeed, better for us serving Egypt than our dying in the wilderness. So that's not humor already. I'm going to stop right there and say, that's not humor. That's about saying that the project of liberation is an empty project. And this goes to the core of the biblical theme, which is it better to be free, or is it better to be free and struggle, or is it better to be alive and have all of your, a slave, and have all your needs met by a despotic ruler? And so we have two positions really clashing right then and there. And of course, the Bible is going to say it's better to be free as a human being with all of the struggles and challenges and even dangers that exist with freedom than to live one day as a slave. I'm exaggerating, but you get the point, okay? Let's go on. So Moshe said to the people, do not be afraid, stand fast and see God's deliverance, which he will work for you today. For as you see Egypt today, you will never see it again for the ages. All right, so don't worry. Moses is saying, don't worry. God will do battle for you, and you, v'atem tacharishun, like be quiet, okay? So not the greatest moment of leadership here. I mean, we could make this the critical statement, but he's turning to God, okay? And look what happens in the very next verse. God said to Moses, Matitzak Elai, why do you cry out to me? Speak to the children of Israel and let them march forward. This is such an iconic verse. It's so iconic in the sense that there's a time for kvetching and a time for getting off your behind and doing what you need to do. Stop kvetching. Notice that in between verse Yudalad and Tetvav 14 and 15, it doesn't record for us, it doesn't relate to us what Moses says to God. Okay, Moses says this to the people. Something is said between Moses and God, but it's deleted, or maybe it's not said, or maybe it's left for us to imagine, whatever. But then God says, stop, go forward, which is, again, what is the story about? The story is not about what you saw in the film at all, okay? The story is about the microcosm of this relationship, the relationship between God and Moses, God and the people and Moses. In the backdrop is the despotic Pharaoh, evil, who is going to have his moment of and is subjecting his armies to complete an utter destruction. It says, and you hold your staff high, stretch out your hand over the sea, and split it, so that the children of Israel enter in the midst of the sea on the dry land. And so here we get the what is driving some of this, and this is literature and this is poetry. Vayavo b'nei Yisrael b'toch hayam vayabasha. So the narrator who's recounting this uses that this phrase occurs in various forms 3 or 4 times during the whole story. So you know that the idea of going on the dry land in the midst of the sea is really the crucial thing. And could it have been that an event like this seared itself into the imagination for this poetic narrator to construct it as follows? Well, I will strengthen Egypt's heart. Now it's Egypt's heart, not Pharaoh, so that they come in after them, and I will be glorified through Pharaoh and all his army and his chariots and his riders. And the Egyptians shall know that I am God when I am glorified through Pharaoh, his chariots and his riders. Okay, it's repeating itself, and we have the kind of echo of the poetry to follow. The messenger of God that was going before the camp of Israel moved beyond and went behind them. A column of cloud moved ahead of them and stood behind them, and came between the camp of Egypt and the camp of Israel. Here were the clouds and the darkness, and it lit up the night. This one did not come near this one all night. Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and God caused the sea to go back with a fierce east wind all night, and made the sea into firm ground. Thus the waters split. How do you understand that? I don't know. But it's this extraordinary event that is, we can't, we don't know how to understand. The children of Israel came through the midst of the sea upon the dry land. The waters, and here you have the trope again. So there's a driving idea and a driving phrase here. The poetic phrase is driving the whole narrative. The Egyptians pursued and came in after them, all of Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his riders into the midst of the sea. Now it was a daybreak watch that God looked out against the camp of Egypt in the column of fire and cloud, and he panicked the camp of Egypt. He loosened the wheels of his chariots and made them drive with heaviness. Egypt said, I must flee before Israel, for God does battle for them against Egypt. And then God said to Moshe, stretch out your hand over the sea, and the water shall return upon Egypt and upon its chariots and upon its riders. Moshe stretched his hand over the sea. The sea returned at the face of daybreak to its original place as the Egyptians were fleeing toward it. And God shook the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. The waters returned. They covered the chariots and the riders of all Pharaoh's army that had come after them into the sea. Not even one of them remained. But the children of Israel had gone upon dry land through the midst of the sea, the waters for them a wall on their right and on their left. Halchu bayabasha b'toch hayam hamayim lahem chama miminam u'mismalam. So God delivered Israel on that day from the hand of Egypt. Israel saw Egypt dead by the shore of the sea, and Israel saw the great hand that God had wrought against Egypt. And the people held God in awe. They trusted in God and in Moshe, his servant. Vayaminu badonai uva Moshe avdo. I just want to, we'll just focus on two things. Vayar Yisrael et Mitzrayim met al Svatayam. It wasn't the soldiers, it wasn't the horses, it wasn't the chariots, it was Egypt. They saw Egypt dead. Okay, and so what you have here is a kind of, I don't want to say it's a pun, but it's almost saying, yeah, this is what Egypt is. Egypt is focused on the dead. Egypt, the whole culture of Egypt is the culture of the dead and the mystery and the pyramids and the graves and the tombs and the pharaohs who are all about the afterlife. And here, the Egyptians, Egypt, the country, the civilization. I mean, it goes on obviously after this quite a long time. But as far as the Bible is concerned, the Israelites see Egypt dead. Okay? And what's going to be the theme of the Bible? Life. Egypt is death, Israel is life. Israel saw the great hand of God against Egypt. The people had awe of God, they trusted in God and in Moshe as servant. I'm going to stop there. That's the text. So the text then, as a religious text, which lends itself in some ways to all of these questions as to how did it happen? Why did it happen? What did, go on? All of which are speculative questions. They're philosophical questions that are, I guess, unanswerable questions because they're not scientific questions. I mean, people have tried to understand this scientifically. There's an article I tried to pull up, but there was too much of a paywall to get this article, so I didn't bother paying for it. Trying to explain, that the wind had to go at 60 something miles per hour, and we know that there's such a thing as a tide, and there's such a thing as a wind, and all that, and all of that's kind of irrelevant, because what's going on here, on some level, is an event happened. We have no way of conveying, other than in words and poetry, the depth of this event. And we have no way of understanding this event the same way that, as we talked about, 70, 80 years after a war, after the Second World War, no matter how many books, no matter how many movies, no matter how many interviews, no matter how many testimonies you read and immerse yourself in, you will not be able to understand this. You will not be able to reenact it. You will have something in your imagination, but it will only be a fraction of what took place. We have had calamitous experiences. We witnessed in real time what happened on 9/11. No movie, no poem, no piece of literature, no photograph can adequately convey the totality of that experience, to the people that experienced it at that time, and they remain to a certain extent traumatized. Those who survived, obviously, to this day from that, and that's what the nature of these momentous events are. So the text then is trying to encapsulate whatever it can in order to convey its singular message, and its message is in the punchline. Vayar Yisrael met al Svatayam. Israel saw Egypt dead, Vayaminu badonai Moshe avdo, and they believed in Moses. They had trust with Moses, and Vayaminu badonai, they had awe. Vayar Yisrael tayad ugla asher asad Adonai Mitzrayim. They saw the great hand that God had wrought against Egypt, and they held God in awe, and they trusted in Moses, his servant. And that's the story. The story is a story which establishes for that moment, and it only lasts a moment, because just a couple of days later, they're going to be complaining. So they reach this moment where they have this intense experience, and we know that it collapses. And that's the human story. The human story is a story of faith, steadfast faith. We think that a person can have that, but if you hold the story there, then it becomes an iconic graphic moment of steadfast faith. But if you read the very next chapter, it tells you that they complained about not having water, not having food, and the story of what it means to be alive is actually much more complicated. And that's the real story. How do you live in a real world with your steadfast faith when reality doesn't comport with what you have just experienced? A lot of hands here. I think, Bob, you were first, Annette, and then Sally. Go ahead.
Thank you. You started off today's class showing us the two films,
Yes.
and it got me to thinking about the great Marshall McLuhan's famous
Okay.
comment, "Medium is the message," Canadian, right?
Indeed.
And so I'm wondering your thoughts in terms of if someone is deaf and has to have these texts signed to them, if someone is blind and reads it in Braille, or whether or not it's presented in any one of different media, does the message come across in the same way? Because we're kind of privileging the reading of the text in this way. But I'm wondering your thoughts about the effect of the medium on the message.
It's such a fascinating question, and I actually did think about this. In fact, I in my list of questions, I'm going to start by saying that the text most likely starts as an oral text. That is to say, it most likely was conveyed orally. The Song at the Sea, which is the following chapter, chapter 15, we basically know, we come to, when we worship, I mean, people who are in the regular habit of worship, pretty much know that text, and you don't have to read it. It's sung and it's recited and it's off by heart and it's heard. So the first medium of this text, and let's just say every biblical text, was probably oral. And so people are listening and listening with their imagination. I do this exercise. I want you to be proud of me. I do this regularly, where I have all these things, all these books, and the text on the screen and everything. But there's a website in Israel, 929. They have and a wonderful, beautiful, talented reader. And I listen to every chapter on my headphones. And I swear to you, I learn something different by listening to it, and just a slight cadence, a slight change in a tone, I get a whole different interpretation of the text. And it's hard to explain, but that's the nature of oral transmission. Now, so I'm gonna try and wiggle out of this, Bob, but say that people who are blind can still access the text orally through their ears. People who are deaf, they would be able to access the text visually through reading, presuming that they had learned to read. That's a big presumption, I understand. To the person who is blind and deaf, that, let's just say, I don't want to say it in any demeaning way, but not being able to read or hear the Bible may not be their first problem. That's for sure. Okay. How do you convey any kind of information, and what would their experience of that be would be a really tremendous question. But there's no, we live in an overwhelmingly visual age. And what I guess I was showing there in a polemical way, and without making this too much of the focus here, is that there are so many pitfalls to the visual depiction of the story, because in the end, while they're artistic and they are expressive and they're very, very creative, they take away more than they add. And I have much more joy and much more pleasure in trying to interpret what is written and open up worlds of imagination that are way beyond the visual depictions that you saw. And so this is, as great as the Cecil B. DeMille film is, and it was an achievement. It just raises all of these questions as to how finite it is, as all art is finite. Yes, Stanley, go ahead. I was
Yeah, well, so I found the visual image, in fact, very compelling, and I was asking myself, when I go jumping in, when I see, the water going to the sides. And I just want to say again that I think the power of God is one trope, but the other side of it is the existential leap, as it were, that the people of Israel had to make. True, the Egyptians were chasing them. They didn't know whether the Egyptians would kill them or bring them back to Egypt, which seems to be what at least Cecil B. DeMille said. They want the slaves back again. All right, so that's a choice they made, but then they had to have a certain kind of faith. They were not going to drown in that sea. And I think, frankly, to go back to what you asked about the Christian audience, I mean, evangelical Christians would love this. Jesus saves, God saves. This is, so
very Christological, right? Yes,
it's right there, and I can see it's not only for Jews, it's for many people. And finally, I would say you were referring, I think, rightly to the context. This was post-war, that a lot of people were not saved, and to have a movie here that reminds us that there are times when God does indeed come through and saves is important as well.
Very lovely. Okay, Nanette, go ahead.
So I'm sitting here, I'm trying to put myself in the Israelite shoes. They still have, the reason they're complaining in the book is because they still have the slave mentality. I mean, the Red Sea parted, Moses did this, and maybe for a day or two, they felt great. But then if they only grew up in the slave mentality, it's not so easy to change. It takes years.
That's why it takes years for them to get to the land of Israel. That's right. Absolutely. Ilana, go ahead.
It's interesting to note that God is using his power through water, like the flood in the time of Noah, to punish, and then now also for good reasons, like Moshe in the basket. Nothing happened to him when he was like the water was taking care of him.
Yes.
Also, in Moses' attitude towards God, when he was told to raise his hand now and the water was going to split, he did it with no hesitation. But when he was asked to hit the rock, to talk to the rock and to get right in the desert.
In the desert later on, yes.
Later on, then he was hesitating that maybe it wouldn't happen and it will put God not in a good position. So he hid it. So it's interesting to see how his belief or attitude towards God is sometimes different.
These are all very, and so what you're pointing out here is that the way that a miracle happens in the Bible actually changes in the course of the Bible, in the course of the Torah. You have this major moment where it seems that the laws of physics are being suspended, and you have another moment where Moses takes basically all the power when he hits the rock, and you go from this moment to that moment, and you see that there's an inversion that, here in this moment, it's all God's power with a little bit of human action. And there it's all human power with a little bit of God. And this idea is pointed out by a scholar, Richard L. Friedman. And he shows that the whole Bible itself, it starts out with a lot of God, And the Bible ends with very little God, right? And the story of the Bible, broadly told, is a story of human beings having to take more responsibility for themselves. And miracles, and the way that we understand miracles, functions really as one of the key themes in that story. Gittel.
Now, this is asked for Bob to respond to Bob's. If you think about the modality of signing clearly can be done in a more musical way, in a more dramatic way, more powerful way. So signing can probably give to somebody who has to live by that manner as much information, or almost as much information, as we get orally.
Indeed. Bob, last word.
I just wanted to say that last year, I think I made the comment that the parting of the Red Sea was also the birth canal for the
Indeed.
people. But I recently heard another Hasidic rabbi talking that this Parsha is also about the birth of courage in the people of Israel, because he traces it back to Abraham with Nimrod, and Isaac with the Akedah, and Yaakov with Esau, and Joseph and Moses. But this is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, would be the first time of collective courage as the backbone to the people. So it was a very interesting
yes, and it's, the whole birth theme is very important, and Pharaoh becomes the kind of midwife. I just want to end with some visual depictions of the Exodus. Okay, you'll see on the left all these different ways, which only tells you how wild the imagination can be in the visual depiction, and you'll make whatever you need to make out of these kinds of things. Okay, I have a different set of thoughts about the Exodus as not as a kind of channel, but as a bubble that the Israelites are walking like. And this one is very famous, or this idea, right? Moses standing between two walls. I think that whole idea needs to be looked at, because the idea of walls of water doesn't mean literal walls. It could mean that you're in a horseshoe, and that there's a wall on your right and a wall on your left. And it kind of would make sense that the wind is blowing at your back and pushing the water, so that you're walking through more or less on as a horseshoe or in a large V. Okay. And what I couldn't get over when I saw this is that, in fact, there's a whole culture on the right-hand side. We're living in a very body tattoo culture. And so what you have here is the Exodus on people's legs and arms and everywhere else on their body. And you just got to ask, why is that happening? I'm not really sure why, but I'll leave it there. Just to say that this is about identity, and identity is about putting things that are powerful to you, so that everybody can see it. And that is, again, one more manifestation, a visual manifestation of the text. In other words, to be charitable, you become the walking visualization, the text of the Torah. And I'll save that debate for a different time. Okay. All right. It was so great, everyone. We'll see you soon. Next week, it's going to get harder and harder, the Torah.
Thank you. Yashikoa.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody. Have a good week.